Hello and welcome to the Cars.co.za podcast episode 8. My name is Ciro De Siena and my guest today is Alex Parker. We go way back, and Alex, I'm so happy you've made it into the Cars.co.za studio.
Me too. Took a while.
Yes.
Here we are.
Alex is a busy man. He really is. And today's topic, will electric cars work in South Africa? I don't think there's anyone better to speak on it than Alex, and we'll get into the nitty-gritty in a second. But quick merchandise punt from our Cars.co.za online store, Cars.co.za/shop. I'm not going to talk about this forever, but we've got some really cool stuff. That's the new M3. That is a Opel Kadett. Look at that. That's really nice.
Very good.
And then this one, I actually really want that. That's all the Skylines. That's
cool.
Nice. Yeah,
Very nice.
I do want that. I might actually buy myself one of those. So yeah, get in there before I do, basically.
I might walk off with that, actually.
We'll keep an eye on you. So I think let's start off with the actual products themselves, right? Yeah. Do you feel that EVs are good enough now to replace internal combustion engines?
Expensive ones are, yes, absolutely. and that's the change that scale is going to bring, right? So you know that recently Porsche have launched a couple of electric cars here, and they are phenomenal, obviously, phenomenally expensive, obviously. But in driving one of those cars, the new Taycan base model, I really didn't see what I couldn't do with that car, other than the one thing that everyone talks about with electric cars, which they never do, which is drive to Johannesburg from Cape Town.
That is the one thing that comes up. Whenever I tweet about electric cars, a lot of people will say to me, no, I'm not buying one until I can drive from Johannesburg to Cape Town. Well, you can't really do that in a petrol-powered car, at least not on one tank anyway. No. Look, I will concede that it takes 5 minutes to fill up a petrol-powered car. Definitely does not take 5 minutes to fill up an electric car.
No.
But how often do you actually drive from Johannesburg to Cape Town? And it's much safer and cheaper to fly anyway.
Well, exactly. I mean, when you normally buy a car, do you buy it for that purpose? Do you buy your car that you drive every day to drive 1,400 kilometers? Of course you don't.
Yeah.
You buy it for the cost of it and what it can achieve for you in your daily life. So I think it's a bit of a red herring. Most people who need to go to Johannesburg from Cape Town get a plane.
Yeah.
And if you really want to drive in your electric car, well, you can. It's just going to take a little longer.
Yeah, exactly.
And to be honest, in all likelihood, you wouldn't do it in one day. I mean, I've done it a few times recently, and you always do it over 2 days. So you're driving 800 Ks in one day. So it's one stop, maybe two. It's not actually that much of a stretch. And that's with current technology.
Yeah. I was, my sister works for Tesla. She lives in Norway. She's the architectural specialist for the Nordic region.
Cool.
But even so, she doesn't get staff discounts on
really?
Tesla. She had to go just into a Tesla shop and buy one. So she bought a Model 3 long range, and I was just reading into it just before you got here. 315 miles range, which is just over 500 kilometers.
Yeah.
And I was chatting to her the other day, and I said, how often do you charge your car? And she said, about once every 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So
that's the reality, isn't it? I mean, for most of your life, it's going to be something that you would fill up as often as you would fill up a normal car. I drove a BMW X3 in Johannesburg for a while, and that has a much less range than that, obviously. And yeah, I drove it for a week, and I charged it once.
Yeah.
And I was busy. I was going between Johannesburg and Midrand up to Rosslyn to the factory with BMW. So I was doing mileage, and you really don't, generally speaking, you don't require all that capacity. And that becomes an environmental argument, actually, that some people like to make, that modern electric cars have too much range. It's an interesting argument. They have too much range because you don't need it, and you put all these rare earth metals and other resources into this enormous battery that's capable of doing 600 kilometers, and the most you do in the day is 70 Ks. An engineer from BMW made the point recently, actually, that he thinks that in a lot of city cars, range is going to decline as an offering in cars.
Well, it makes the car cheaper, right?
Makes the car a lot cheaper.
Because the battery is the most expensive component.
Exactly. So the car gets a lot cheaper, and the charging infrastructure is going to become so ubiquitous that it doesn't matter. You know, you pop in, you buy a cup of coffee. 20 minutes later, you've got the extra 80 Ks you need, and you go.
Yeah.
That's potentially, in terms of city driving, where we're going to go. cars with less mileage, less range, and that's something that we should consider welcoming because it'll make the car so much cheaper.
I think as a second car, a car with less mileage. So, for instance, again, using the example of my sister, her partner just needs to get to school and back. She's a teacher, and they bought an electric up, which I'm super jealous about because, I mean, how cool is that? A VW up electric.
Yeah.
It's got
Yorkshire's national car, the E-Up.
Really? All right. So that's got 80 Ks range, right? Which sounds minimal. But again, school's 8 Ks away. So it's a return trip of 16 Ks. They still don't charge it every day, or need to charge it every day. And that speaks to your point that actually sometimes less capacity is actually just fine and makes the car particularly affordable.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think,
well, I mean, another good example is one of the big markets for electric cars, which is in China, which obviously, until recently, the Tesla Model 3 was by far and away the best-selling electric car in China. It's now been overtaken by a tiny little thing called the... I've made a note. Checks notes literally.
Yes, please check your
literally
notes.
checks notes because it's called the Wuling Hongguang Mini EV.
Okay.
And it now sells double the number of Tesla and the Model 3s.
Sheesh.
And the entry model that doesn't have air conditioning is $4,460.
Wow, so that is about
63,000 rand.
63,000 rand. You can't buy a golf cart for 63,000 rand.
No, not even a Spa trolley, Ciro. And the top of the range that has aircon, 75,000 rand, $5,300, and it's selling like 2 to 1 the Tesla Model 3.
That's incredible.
It's got a range of about 100 Ks.
That's not bad.
Yeah, and you can seat 4 people in it, and it looks kind of funny.
Yeah.
But it's made with that General Motors joint venture SAIC.
Okay.
And it's fine. They're selling loads of them.
That's China. I went to Tokyo with Nissan to look at the Leaf 2, which sadly never ever came here. And I think it would have been SA's cheapest electric car at the time. I'm not sure where it would sit now. But the one of the big cheeses from Nissan told us that the Chinese government said, right, you can all come in and make EVs, but they have to be at this spec, they have to cost this much, and all the rest of it, because obviously they've got such a massive air pollution problem, desperately trying to get rid of vehicle traffic, or at least internal combustion vehicle traffic.
Yes.
And I suppose what you're talking about there is a result probably of that legislation. So it just shows you how legislation can help and drive the market. Yeah.
Well, I mean, obviously how hard it is to get hold of a license plate in some Chinese cities. You can wait years.
Sure.
Just because they're trying to keep the congestion down.
Yeah.
If you buy an electric car, you can jump that queue in some of those cities.
Okay.
So there are many ways that the Chinese government and Chinese cities, Chinese regions try to push the electric cars because they do have such an air quality problem. There's only a few places on Earth with worse air quality problems. One of which, of course, is Johannesburg.
Yeah, Delhi, I suppose, as well. So these areas, I think, are ripe for legislative change or legislative-driven change.
Yeah.
And I think so. I suppose we can maybe move on from that. So the cars are good enough now. The range is good enough. The prices are always going to come down. I think it's very analogous to cell phones. The first one was this big, and you had to carry a separate battery around and all the rest of it, and they costed the earth. And now cell phones are what they are. So I think the electric car will go the same way. The next big one I want to address with you, and this always comes up. I talk about electric cars often on platforms such as Cape Talk Radio. It begins with an E, it ends with a SCOM.
Yes.
Eskom, right?
Yes.
So how can we have electric cars if we have load shedding? That is one of the biggest hurdles, I think, to public adoption, or at least just psychological adoption of the electric car movement. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know. I think it plays into a sort of, it's almost childish. It's sort of, it plays into a general lack of trust in government, right? And anything the government does is obviously ridiculous and corrupt. That's a kind of default position that people can take. And frankly, when you see what's happened to us, one can understand why.
It's understandable,
But it's also nonsensical in this case. It's the same as people saying they don't like lockdown, so they're not going to have a vaccine. It's just not related. The fact of the matter is that Eskom is in a great deal of trouble, has a massive debt problem, although they're working it off. You and I both know that, generally speaking, the power's on. And you and I both know that at night, when you charge your cell phone, you wake up in the morning and your cell phone is charged. I cannot remember ever not having a cell phone because of load shedding. It's off for 2 hours.
And actually, the cell phone analogy works because if you install a relatively high-powered charger in your home, a 21 kilowatt-hour charger, or 21 kilowatt charger, rather, a big electric battery will charge in about 4 hours.
Yeah.
And generally, there's 4 hours of power overnight.
Yeah.
I can't think of a time where there hasn't been 4 hours of power overnight.
No.
So
I mean, there are sort of catastrophic failures in local grids and stuff, and that does happen up in Joburg occasionally. But I think to sort of propose that that's the norm is just a bit odd. Generally speaking, the power is on. I'm much more interested in discussion. I find that almost childish. I think there are more interesting discussions to be had about the quality of the electricity, the carbon related to the carbon associated with the electricity that we generate in this country, and what does that mean for the environmental efficacy of an electric car. That's an interesting discussion. But whether the power is on or not, I think that's a bit silly.
Yeah.
Yes, there's load shedding. It's not going to stop you from charging your car. And if you ever get to a point where the power goes off for 2 hours and you literally can't go anywhere in your car in the morning, that's really more about you than it is about Eskom.
I wanted to relate a story. So do you remember the Joule?
Yes,
South Africa's
I drove
Joule?
one.
Oh, you drove one?
I drove one.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to
Yeah.
chat to you about that.
Yeah.
So when I had the first i3 on test and we were filming it, I got in touch with Cobus Meyering, who was the man behind the Joule.
Yeah.
And I said, would you like to drive the i3? And we can chat about it on camera while you're driving. So
Nice
that was
idea.
actually quite a cool film.
Yeah.
And, the one thing he said to me, what's quite interesting about Eskom, because one of the arguments against EVs is how are we going to power all these electric cars when we don't actually have enough generating capacity really to power the country.
Yeah.
So the reality is, though, that we don't have enough capacity at specific times.
Right.
So peak time morning, peak time
Yeah.
evening, yes, the grid is constrained.
Yes.
However, because we're mostly coal-powered, you can't actually switch off a coal-powered fire station. All you can really
No.
do is divert the steam away
Yeah.
from the turbine.
It's
so
massively wasteful.
yeah. So actually at night, which is when electric cars will be charged, there is actually a massive amount of overcapacity
Absolutely. And
in the
middle
grid.
of the day, like we are talking right now,
Yeah.
that Eskom is making too much electricity.
Yeah.
And people can't believe it when you say that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting misconception. And when he explained it to me like that, I thought that makes so much sense. So yes, we do have the capacity right now, and hopefully now with Cyril Ramaphosa opening up that 100 megawatt rule, we'll have more capacity in the public grid as big users go offline, or go off the grid. So that'll be great for the general consumer as well.
It's a problem because they also stop paying.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
So it does play into sort of Eskom's massive dilemma, that is that the more people that come off grid, the more heavy users who pay for electricity come off grid. It leaves more and more generally destitute people who rely on electricity that is free, and who aren't paying. So Eskom has a sort of deteriorating debt problem. So actually, and talk about unpopular opinions, the best thing you can do as a South African is to remain with Eskom, and because it's going to help. If you accept that the country cannot thrive without Eskom, then you have to stay with Eskom, as much as it might drive you mad to consider it.
Wow, I feel like we need to do a podcast on Eskom, actually. So Alex, I mean, you work quite extensively in this field, and I think one of the more interesting aspects of the electrification of vehicles and how it will affect South Africa is how it will affect our exports, which are a massive money spinner for this country and a big employer as well. And I suppose the summary really is, if we're making cars for export markets that don't need them or don't want them, then we're in trouble.
Yes.
And I suppose that's kind of, am I correct in saying that?
That is, and that's precisely what's happened. So 80% of the cars we build in South Africa, and we build about 0.6, 0.7% of the world cars here. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it's actually quite a lot.
That actually sounds quite, that sounds like a decent number.
We build a few cars here, and 80% of them go to the UK and the EU. And there are other rats and mice, not in terms of markets, but in terms of the numbers that we export, so places like Japan and Russia. But the vast majority go to the UK and the EU, and those are both markets that have banned internal combustion from 2030.
Yeah.
So, and when I say I need to be clear. The UK has said it will ban it by 2030. The law hasn't been passed, and the EU, the European Commission has now announced a directive that it wants to ban internal combustion by 2030 and hybrids by 2035, including vans, by the way, which is not a small thing. It's the delivery network, the small LDVs, and that's quite a massive deal. They need to get that ratified through the various parliaments, the national parliaments within the EU. But that's their directive, that's their proposal, and that's 80% of our market. So there's a crunch time, because in terms of, I don't need to tell you, in terms of car model cycles, that's 1.5 cycles away.
It's about 7 years, per cycle.
Per cycle, yeah.
So and to retool a factory is also a good couple of $1 billion, and
exactly
a couple of years as well, yeah.
Exactly. So if you think about a car company I know well, which is BMW, we know that they're building the X3 currently. There'll be a new model in 2024 probably. What will it be? It'll be another X3. It'll probably be the PHEV. That's what people are saying.
Plug-in hybrid electric.
Yeah, the plug-in hybrid. But then what? That's a massive decision that needs to be made in the next 5 years about the future of that plant. And that's not a BMW thing. That's an all South African automotive company's question. Or they either need to turn to building electric cars, or they need to find new markets. And that is a discussion that the South African operations won't have much control over, because those kind of things are controlled at head office.
In Germany.
In Germany, for example. So if you look at Volkswagen, they've been building cars here for years. They're building the Polo and the Polo Vivo for this market. But for the international market, they build the Polo. They build it really well. It's highly regarded as a great product. But the Polo will surely go electric. So what happens to the plant in, I've forgotten its new name.
Karicha.
Karicha, thank you. What happens to the plant there?
Yeah.
Does it go electric, or does it need to find new markets? We don't know the answer to that. But these are critical discussions. And obviously the DTIC, the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, they are aware of this. There are various white papers zinging around about helping the car industry turn to electric car production, But there isn't the sense of urgency that I would feel if I was running a car company here that builds cars. You've got to find new markets, or you've got to turn to electric cars. If you're Toyota and you're building Buckies and Sesvikilas and whatnot, you're going to find lots of developing markets to sell those vehicles. But if you're building X3s and C-classes, it's a different story. And that's quite critical, and I don't quite know where that goes.
Yeah. So companies like Ford, for instance, who have invested heavily in Silverton and Ranger production, I mean, they sell quite a lot to West Africa, particularly Nigeria. They'll probably be fine for a good 2 decades, I would say. Yeah.
They will, because the general sense coming up to the COP26 meeting in November, which is the great sort of environmentalist shindig
in Glasgow.
That's coming up now. There is some of the more progressive or radical people are asking that they all car companies stop all internal combustion production by 2035. Others are saying 2040. There are people, I think, like us sitting in developing markets who would add a note of caution and say you've got to get real about what's possible in these markets.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be a big discussion for next year, because I think that COP this year is more about the developed world. I think what's coming is what happens in the developing world. Obviously, the next COP27 will be in Africa. That's already been agreed, and I think that's time we're going to start seeing a lot of interest on how we decarbonize transport in Africa and other developing places. Yeah,
because I mean, if we just go crystal ball gazing just for South Africa, right? Yeah. I can't see a time in the next 15, 20 years where we aren't driving, say, diesel Hiluxes. Yeah. You know, I mean, diesel Buckies are kind of the backbone of this economy. That's right. So, and unless I don't see a Toyota building an electric Hilux anytime soon either. I mean, although the Ford F-150 Lightning looks particularly good and it's come in at a particularly good price, and that could be a watershed moment for that segment. But I think that fuel production, oil imports are going to have to carry on pretty much as is here, at least, for perhaps 2 decades until we can sort of phase over or transition rather.
I think that I'm not going to agree with you because I don't know that we can know because it really depends on the developed world. How much do they really want to do this? Because they know as much as we know in the developing world that we can't afford this. We just don't have the money to develop a massive charging infrastructure and hydrogen routes for hydrogen trucks. It's just not really within the realms of even vaguely possible at the moment. I mean, we're talking about in South Africa, a middle-income country. In poorer countries, it's really an unlikely outcome, isn't it?
Yeah.
So the question is, how much does the rich world want to push us and pay for it, frankly? And that's actually going to be a big discussion at COP this year, is how much the governments of the rich world are willing to pay to help developing countries decarbonize transport, especially public transport in big cities, and get people out of diesel buses, which we know, and we know all the health issues related to diesel emissions. It's not a joke. It's quite unpleasant. So, yeah.
And that you said they should maybe help fund it on this side, right? But CBAM, which a concept that I did not know existed, which you've introduced me to before we came to record this podcast, that could affect South Africa quite severely as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So they call it CBAM. It's the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, and you know that the fans of Cars.co.za tune in to listen to EU tax discussions. Obviously,
it's important stuff, and I think if you can help me understand it, then I think our audience will be grateful.
So the idea is that the Europeans want to set extremely strict carbon emissions legislation for the companies that operate within the EU. So the temptation for companies operating in the EU will be to export the production of certain items that are carbon heavy and then just import the products. And they call that carbon leakage. So they say, okay, well, we won't build this product in the EU because we're going to get taxed on it because of the carbon emissions. We'll just go and do it in India or in South Africa. And then we'll just import the product. So to stop that, they're introducing something called, from 2023, it's called the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism.
And this is going to happen.
This is happening.
It's happening.
It's happening. It starts with just like the really heavy stuff. So it's steel, concrete, fertilizers, energy, oil and gas, that kind of stuff, the really heavy carbon stuff. But it will trickle down, shall we say, to everything. And the way it works is kind of like how we work with BEE regulations here. It's something that is legislated and accounted for in an accounting process. So when you import a product into the EU, you will declare via your auditor the carbon weighting of that product. In other words, how much carbon was emitted in the process of creating the product that you are now importing into the EU. And you will be taxed on that unless it's taxed at source.
Unless it's taxed at source.
Yeah.
So in a South African context, right, let's say I manufacture pots and pans.
Right.
And I export to the EU, but most of the electricity I use to make that pot and pan comes from a coal-fired power station. So I will be penalized as a manufacturer.
Yes.
Unless the South African government taxes me here.
Right.
Carbon taxes
Carbon
me.
taxes. Yeah. And obviously the EU's intention is to persuade exporter markets into the EU to start using carbon tax, to start getting people around the world to reduce their carbon emissions in the production of stuff that goes to the EU.
So to bring that back to cars, if I'm Volkswagen down in Kariga, or Ford in Silverton, or Merck, or BMW, and I get my power to make my cars from coal power stations, that means my products are less attractive to a European buyer because of the carbon tax that would need to be paid at the border.
Yeah.
So then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, let's go make our polos in Thailand, or let's go make our Rangers in, Philippines or whatever it is.
That's right.
Yeah.
And for the big international manufacturers, I think it's one thing. But it's more interesting for the small and medium enterprises. So imagine you're a fruit farmer in Citrusdal. What can you do to reduce your carbon? the carbon associated with the lemons that you are exporting to the EU. Well, you can go solar. You can get off grid because obviously Eskom is very coal heavy, and you can electrify your fleet.
Sure.
And once you do that, your product comes with you have a rand advantage. You'd have to do the business. You'd have to balance the books in terms of the cost of doing that versus the tax advantage of doing it. But
that's fascinating.
But it is coming, and it'll come this decade. So if you're in business and if you run a reasonably sized business and you're not considering your carbon emissions in terms of your exports to the EU, it don't have to be Volkswagen. It can be anyone. If you have a diesel bakkie, that's going to have to be accounted for ultimately at the border of the EU. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So if you have you mean a diesel bakkie, if you run your citrus farm on diesel Hiluxes and diesel tractors and all the rest of it, then there's potentially a carbon penalty there.
There will be, yeah, and it'll have a tax implication.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And that, going back to what you said about Eskom, is actually not great, because if farmers and all the rest of it have to go off grid to improve their financial standing or their carbon tax standing with the EU, then that's bad news for Eskom. Obviously.
It is bad news for Eskom. Yeah. Which is why, I mean, Eskom's under massive pressure, obviously, to get out of coal anyway.
Yeah.
And I think Eskom knows that it has to. It's really about they need to find a plan that will attract international discretionary finance, basically, and building more power stations out for coal ain't it. The time when big banks would fund that kind of thing are well and truly over. So Eskom needs to have new ideas. Yeah,
that's absolutely fascinating. I think though, given the sign on the wall, I'd love to pick your brain about what sort of cars South Africans are going to be driving in the next 10, 20 years, right? So as you arrived, you noticed that we had the brand new Corolla Hybrid parked outside. I've been driving it for a week. I'm absolutely loving it. It's the cheapest hybrid in South Africa. Yeah. But as a transitionary technology, what do you think about plug-in hybrids, PHEVs?
Yeah. So environmentalists don't like them. They and they have good reason, because especially in the developed world, because obviously the car's plug-in, the car company has to have access to the data, and if you have a PHEV in some cities, you don't pay for parking, you don't pay the congestion charge, you don't pay the ultra low emission zone charging, all that kind of stuff that you have in places like London. If you have a PHEV, you kind of get behind all that, because in theory your car can run for 60 or 80 k's on electric before the petrol engine kicks in. People don't tend to drive them like that. They just buy them. They're wealthy people. They live in London. They fill them with petrol and they drive them like normal hybrids. No one plugs them in. However, I think that that's not necessarily quite the same here, because I think that people are concerned about the cost of petrol here. 18 rand a litre is not funny. So plug-in hybrids, I think it's really a cost issue. They're very expensive. As a transitionary technology, that Corolla outside and the RAV4 that's coming, and the Corolla Cross that's coming, built in Durban, I think they offer genuinely good solutions to transitionary technology.
And the pricing's good,
really
good.
Yeah, excellent prices. Yeah, and for me, in terms of the cost to human health of diesel emissions, I really do think that the petrol electric hybrids offer a massive improvement. And it is, and we do have to talk about making steps in the right direction. Yeah. I don't think there's any point being, being so sort of extreme about it. We can't demand that South Africans all go out and buy an electric car tomorrow. It won't happen. If we can persuade people who were going to buy a diesel car to buy a petrol hybrid car and see the real world fuel consumption as being as superb as it is, and then getting those terrible NOx and SOx particles out of the air, especially in Joburg, I think would be really a good step in the right direction. And I would just say to people, go and drive one. For real, because I mean, I find that the fuel consumption on those things on a petrol electric hybrid is way better than a diesel.
Well, so this is actually the comparison I wanted to chat to you about. So I'm loving this Corolla Hybrid because it's now the cheapest hybrid in SA. It's a good 50K cheaper than the Honda Fit Hybrid.
Yeah.
Look, the Honda Fit's are actually quite a bit nicer inside, a bit nicer spec. But you know, for day-to-day commuting, this Corolla is ticking a lot of boxes for me. So I'm averaging 4.9 to the 100. Yeah. But then I thought to myself, when the current generation 3 Series came out, I had the 320D for a week, and I also averaged 4.9 to the 100. Yeah. However, a diesel 320D in South Africa is not as clean as a diesel 320D in America, right? Because they, what was it you were telling me off air? They strip one of the...
they just don't send it with the DPF, the diesel particulate filter. They take it off because our fuel is so dirty. Our diesel is so, should we call it old-fashioned?
Unevolved.
Unevolved. I think we're on Euro 2 still. Maybe
we are on Euro 2, yeah.
That's
which got set in 1999. It's actually quite depressing.
It is, yeah.
So diesel also, as you were mentioning, is particularly bad for human health. Yeah. And the diesel particulate filter goes a long way to mitigating that. Yeah. But if they're not sold in South Africa with that, then it's not really a solution. No. So the hybrid, petrol is a cleaner technology. With a hybrid, you're using a lot less of it. And it's really interesting to see what Toyota's doing here. The pricing, do you think the pricing is artificial? It seems very, very low.
I did speak to them about it because it's clear to me that Toyota's strategy is to hybridize as much as they can in developing markets. I think that they see that as the obvious gap in terms of immediate reduction of bad emissions. That and using hydrogen as well in the future. And it's very clear to me that the strategy is to make hybrids affordable. I don't think that that artificial is the right word. I think this is the plan. I think they want hybrids to
grab market share.
Yeah, I think they want people to drive hybrids because you know that diesel is on its way out. I mean, when did you last drive an Audi diesel? Like it's there. Toyota haven't sent a diesel here in terms of like a RAV or a passenger car, like a RAV4 diesel.
That's true. I don't think you can actually buy a RAV4 diesel.
You can't. Yeah. No, they're gone. They don't like the tech because they know it's dirty. So obviously a Hilux or a Sesfikile or something, you're going to have to sell it as a diesel. But in passenger cars, they're trying to not sell it, and I think that they want to replace that technology with hybrid technology. And when you look at the real world consumption and the real world emissions, it's a vast improvement.
Yeah, it is. I think it is a step in the right direction. I don't think it's the silver bullet, but in a market like ours, which is going to take a significant amount of time to transition to having proper EV infrastructure, and having and while we wait for EVs to reach a price point which is palatable to South Africans, and on that note, I think I've been watching what Haval's doing with the Jolion in this market. Incredible success story for that brand. I mean, I think if they didn't have stock issues, they'd probably be about the 5th biggest brand in this country right now. And my prediction, and I think you've written about this as well, actually, if I'm not mistaken, is that if the Chinese can get cheap EVs into this market, then I think things are going to get particularly interesting. I
think so. I think that the speed with which the regulatory space has changed has surprised, I think, some of the car companies. It goes back to Dieselgate with VW and that sort of the huge embarrassment that company went through after what it did, and justifiably so, it behaved appallingly. But since then, Volkswagen has really driven the shift to EV in the developed world. Sorry, and I think that the EU has moved faster than people were expecting. The British announcement was a real surprise. People were really shocked by that 2030 announcement by Boris Johnson. The Biden administration has just released. It's not mandated yet, but they're talking about a target of 50% EV by 2030. That's the United States. That's a big market.
Yeah, that's massive.
So if those things happen, you can look at what the car companies are planning in terms of their public statements of what their mix is going to look like, and you can see the gap. And some of the car companies have a problem, and Toyota's one of them. They have a problem in terms of their development of electric vehicles. They're not there because they are so invested in hybrid technology and hydrogen tech as well. And they're kind of scrambling a little bit because they see that there's a bit of a gap that they're not ready to fill. They have a market share problem if they don't move fast, Toyota especially, but other car companies as well, Hyundai, Kia, they're not actually ready for what the market will look like in 2030 if they don't rapidly change their strategy. So it's extremely interesting to watch, to say the least, because I think you're going to see rapid movement from people like Toyota and Kia and Hyundai on development of EVs because they don't have a choice.
Yeah, that's I was told yesterday that there's a VW ID3 actually sitting in Joburg at Swartkorp.
Oh, really?
Yeah, on German plates. Yeah, which really? I'm quite excited about. I want to go ahead and have a look at it. It does seem, I think your analysis is spot on. I really do. And, I just keep thinking, okay, an electric Jolion at roughly the same price as a normal one. Sure, that starts as a second car in the garage, as a runaround, that starts to become very attractive.
Exactly, and I think that price parity is almost there. Within 2 years, certainly in the developed markets, it's already happened.
Yeah.
In terms of the cost of a Golf and an equivalent ID3 or whatever the right model is, the prices are going to become kind of the same. That's the function of the battery tech getting cheaper. In all of this discussion, we have to remember to not let the government off the hook. They have done nothing.
Well, in fact, they've made it worse, isn't it? Because there's a 7% surcharge right now on EVs. Yeah.
So you can import a W12 Bentley, and there's less of an import tariff on that than there is on a BMW i3, let alone like a VW ID or an e-tron or anything like that. They do that very cynically because they need to protect the fuel levy. It's a really important source of revenue for them. But just staying here in the Stone Age isn't going to help. They need to come up with a strategy that protects revenue for the fiscus and lets the market develop towards electric vehicles if that's what people want. I don't think just sitting there and making it more expensive for people is the solution.
I don't know if you've been told this, and I really should have looked into it further, but someone quite high up at one of South Africa's larger car brands, I was chatting to them about EVs and what they were putting on sale. And anyway, we spoke about the surcharge. Apparently that 7% is a luxury tax which was levied on the only electric vehicles coming into the country a long time ago were Golf carts, and they were seen as luxury items. Right. And so this luxury surcharge was put on, and apparently that's the 7%, which is now affecting. Is that the case?
Yeah. So
that's amazing.
Electric cars are in the same bracket as Golf carts and milk floats. Of which obviously there are many. So
I can't believe that's true. That's
how it's
phenomenal.
Happened. Yeah.
Wow.
And of course they do have an opportunity. I mean, the tax-free entry to the market for the sub 1000cc engines. There are a lot of cars at sub 1000 cc's now. Yeah. Lots of little triples running around on 999. Centimeters. There is an opportunity there just to move a little bit of the revenue back onto that section of the market and giving a bit of break for the electric cars. You're not going to develop, well, not say you're not going to develop, but it makes it a lot easier to argue for the development of an electric production in South Africa if there's a market for electric cars in South Africa.
That's a good point.
And at the moment there are I think it's 0.3% of the market. It's pretty feeble, and that isn't transformative. That's not going to change anything. No one's going to say, well, we should set up a car factory in South Africa because they buy so many electric cars and they sell 80 a year. Yeah. So that is on the government to some extent. Yeah.
Alex, I think on that note, let's call it a day. I wanted to chat for 30 minutes. We've gone for, I don't know, it feels like about an hour, but it flew by. Yep. So thank you very, very much. Our guest today, Alex Parker, long history in motoring journalism, now working in trying to make the world a cleaner place.
That's me.
Thank you very much for your time. If you haven't seen any of our other podcasts, please check them out. Just hit the playlist on our YouTube channel. We also have north of 500 videos now on the channel, so you'll probably find find something there that you enjoy. Go and check it out. Thank you very much for watching and listening, and we'll see you on the next one. All right. Cheers.
Did you know that we also sell really awesome car-themed merchandise? Check out our range of custom t-shirts and prints at our online store now. Simply click on the square box on your screen and we'll take you there, or the link is in the description below. Thanks for watching.